The skiff came in dead slow, no accord handshake, no reach transponder, nothing but a battered Vask hull matching Hari Rao's drift like it had all the time in the world. And then it said his name. Not his contractor designation. Not or his name, the short one, in a voice that came apart at the bottom the way Vask voices did on human gear. A growl under it that no human throat made. He had heard that voice exactly once before, 19 years ago, with his arm buried to the shoulder in a wreck that was venting its last air around both of them. Harry put down the cutter and did not for a moment breathe. The contract under his hands was a tertiary power bus off a dead-reach scow. Nothing special, the kind of job a chief took when the chief was short, and the rent on a reach-grade cold lockup did not pay itself. He had 3 days to deliver it inert and certified to a broker's agent on Reach Orbital 16, and the payment on the far side of that delivery was already spoken for. It went to a Suul named Eyrie of Six Voices against a debt Hari did not talk about, on a clock he tried not to hear. So he had been having an ordinary bad week, which was the only kind the budget allowed, right up until the wreck of his own history coasted in out of the dark and used his name. He knew the skiff. He had not seen it in 19 years, and he knew it anyway. The way you know a face under the scars. The same blunt Vask fleet build, longer now by 2 welded modules, patched in 100 places by hands that had kept it alive across a third of a human lifetime. He knew the pilot before the lock cycled. There was only one Vask in the galaxy who would come to Hari Rao with no registry, no warning, and no fear that the door would be shut. The multi-tool on his hip had a name engraved in it in Vask glyphs. Hari had carried it for 19 years and had never once said the name out loud, because it was not his name to say, and because saying it would mean explaining the wreck in 47, and he did not explain the wreck in 47 sober. The Vask's name was Daco. Hari had pulled Daco out of a hull that was already a coffin, and Daco had lived, and somewhere in the years after, Daco had decided that made Hari kin other. A Vask word for a debt that does not transfer, and does not expire, and does not, the Vask were very clear, ever quite get paid. Hari had spent 19 years assuming the debt ran one direction. He was about to find out he had the direction wrong. He brought the skiff in on his own contract tow because a Vask hull with no transponder did not dock at a Reach orbital on its own, and because the alternative was leaving Daco out in the dark to be somebody's recovery rights. They cycled through the contractor spur lock together into the recycled broth and ozone air of Reach Orbital 16, and for the first time in 19 years, Hari Rao got a clear look at the Vask he had not let himself think about. Daco was old now. Hari was bad at Vask ages, but you did not need to be good to read this one. Gray threaded the dark umber pelt at the muzzle and along the heavy shoulder yoke, and the kin marks had multiplied into a dense rust-red record across temple and jaw and both backs of the hands. A life's worth of marks where 47 had left only a few. One sensory pit rim was notched by an old burn. The eyes were the same, dark amber set too close by human measure, and fixed on Hari with a flat Vask steadiness that read as nothing until you learned it read as everything.
You kept it.
Didn't know what else to do with it.
They did not do small talk. Vask did not, and Hari had never been good at it, and a kin-other reunion across 2 decades was not the place to start. Daco had come for a reason, and Daco told him in the bay, standing beside the skiff with one furred hand, flat against its patched flank the way a human might touch a sleeping animal.
I am old, Hari. My cluster is small now. Before I go where the marks are red, I came to settle what I carry. You pulled me from a dead hull. By our reckoning, I have owed you 19 years, and the debt is mine to close, not yours to forgive.
You don't owe me anything. That's not how it worked.
It is exactly how it worked.
What Daco had brought him was an inherited drive core. Harry knew at the moment the skiff's spine cowl folded back, the way he knew anything the inheritance had made, the patina that was older than the species using it, the layered ornament that meant nothing to anybody alive, the slow pale blue pulse of a live core seated deep in the hull spine. It was the size of a seated man, 4 structural anchors marrying it to the skiff's keel. And it was, Hari understood with a lurch that had nothing to do with the bay's bad gravity, worth more than everything else he had ever salvaged stacked together. He did the arithmetic before he could stop himself, and hated himself a little for the speed of it. A clean inherited drive core, pulled intact and inert, brokered through the Suul market. That was not a payment against the Erie debt. That was the Erie debt, gone, retired, the clock ripped off the wall. That was a different life, the one where Hari Rao did not wake up doing sums. Ducko had carried their own ship's heart across the dark to hand a human a different life. It was the largest thing anyone had ever tried to give him, and Hari opened his mouth to refuse it on principle. And the bay's contract terminal chimed the particular 3-tone chime that every Reach contractor learned to dread, the one that meant the orbital systems had noticed something and told the Accord about it. The Vask skiff, the moment its keel logged against a Reach dock, had become legible to a registry 40 light minutes away, and the registry had recognized the core. The notice resolved on the terminal in the cold blue-white of Accord boilerplate, and Hari read it twice, the way you read the thing you don't want to have read right. He made Daco tell him the history while he read, because the law and the story never matched, and he needed both. The skiff had been salvaged once. Daco's cluster had pulled it from a debris lee 2 human generations back, a dead hull with a live core, and they had patched it and crewed it and flown it ever since and called it home. What Daco's cluster had not done, because Vask did not bow to Suul paper and never had, was clear the first recovery rights a Suul house had filed on that core before the Vask ever found it. The rights had aged into a lien. The lien had ridden the core, quiet for 60 years, harmless out in the unlogged dark where no Accord registry could read a Vask keel. And then Daco had flown it, for love, into the one place in the galaxy that could.
They're not coming for the skiff.
Daco was quiet a moment, the long, vast quiet that humans learned not to fill.
They will take her heart.
That landed in Hari's chest and stuck. He knew the shape of the Vask grievance the way every Reach contractor did. The homeworld the Accord had deliberated over until it died. And here it was again, miniature, personal, 60 years of a family's life reduced to a line item a broker had the right to collect. He had until the Factor's crew arrived. He pulled the manifest and checked the inbound. Not long, not nearly long enough. He thought about calling Erie. It was the obvious move, and he stood with it for a long 10 seconds. Erie of 6 voices held his debt, and Erie's 5th mentor voice had worked Vask accounts, and a senior broker could buy out a junior house's lien or tie it up in arbitration for a month with a sentence. Erie would probably even do it. And then Hari Rao would owe Erie of 6 voices not 1 debt but 2, the second one specifically for a favor done to a Vask. And the Clade memory would hold that forever. And the 6th voice, the one that found human improvisation, would file it as another data point in whatever long, patient study the 6th voice was making of him. Hari did not want to be interesting to a Suul. Interesting, in his experience, was a thing that got more expensive every time it got measured. He put the comm down. Whatever he was going to do, he was going to do it with his own hands and his own license, the way he did everything badly and on time.
You are doing sums again.
Accounting's free.
He crouched at the core's seating collar and made himself look at it as a salvager, not as a man being handed a different life. And the salvager in him, the 15 years of pulling inheritance hardware out of dead ships for a living, started, quietly, unwillingly, to see a shape. The Factor arrived before Hari had the shape all the way solid. Pell of 2 voices was young, by Suul reckoning. 2 bead counters on the throat chain where Erie carried 6, a harness almost bare of contract bands, a single fresh copper rust one woven at the front like a thing recently and proudly earned. The carapace had no real patina yet. Pell came across the bay at the chest-high Suul gate, 4 limbs forward, 2 manipulator arms folded in the carriage of someone executing a duty exactly to its letter, and presented the seizure order to the bay terminal with the small flourish of a junior broker who had not yet learned that the flourish was unnecessary.
Salvage Chief, I hold a perfected first recovery lien against the inherited drive core presently seated in the registered keel before us. The instrument is 61 standard years matured and cross-readable to this dock by treaty. I am here to take possession of the component intact and inert, as is my house's right. I trust there will be no difficulty.
There's always difficulty.
Pell told him, because Suul could not help but be precise about value, and the number was obscene, and it was the same number Hari had run in his own head 10 minutes ago, looking at a different life. He let it sit in the air between them.
An inert but cracked. Core breached on extraction. Internals shot.
A breached core is scrap.
There it was. Hari had the shape solid now, and he did not like it, because the shape was going to cost Daco nothing and cost Hari everything, which was exactly backwards from how Hari had spent 19 years assuming the debt ran. A Suulian was a right to Pell could lawfully take the core, but Pell would only spend a crew and a cutter and a haul on taking it if there was value at the end. Intact, the core was a fortune. Cracked, it was freight nobody would pay. And the one thing standing between intact and cracked was the extraction. The careful, expert, value-preserving unseating that was the entire trade Hari had spent 15 years learning to do well. He knew how to take a core out clean, which meant he knew precisely how to make sure nobody ever could. He told Daco what he meant to do, fast and quiet, in the gap before Pell's crew came through the lock. Daco listened, and the close-set amber eyes did a thing Hari had no word for. And then the old Vask did something a Vask almost never did with an inherited tool. Daco took the multi-tool off Hari's hip, held it a moment, and pressed it back into Hari's hand, closing the human fingers around it.
The tool's name is Corv.
Harry's throat did something inconvenient. He had carried a dead Vask's name on his hip for 19 years and never once let it past his teeth. And here was the owner of that grief handing him permission like a tool of its own.
Corv.
Then he keyed the multi-tool open to the microdrill, the cracked old workhorse he'd named nothing because it already had a name, and he went to work on the seating collar, not to free the core, but to drive it home. The thing about an inherited drive core was that it had been built to be permanent. Nobody in the salvage trade ever used that fact, because the trade ran the other way. You found a core in a dead hull and you coaxed it loose intact, because intact was where the money was. But the makers, whoever they had been, wherever they had gone, had not built these things to be brokered. They had built them to be, once, forever, married into a hull at the structural level and left there until the hull itself was dust. The seating collar Hari had spent his career learning to gently persuade open had a second behavior under the first. A deep seat, the handling protocols screamed at you never to trigger. A clause number, a bold print don't, because once a core deep-seated, it fused to the keel spine at a level no clean extraction could ever separate. Try to pull a deep-seated core and you cracked it. Always by design. The trade called it ruining a core. The makers had probably called it Tuesday. So Hari Rao took the most valuable object he would ever touch, and he ruined it on purpose, with a dead Vask's tool, working fast against a clock and a junior broker's patience, driving each of the 4 anchors past the line the documentation drew until the seating collar gave the deep, soundless lurch that meant the core had married the keel for good. Pell's crew was through the lock by the 3rd anchor, 2 more Suul and a hauling sled, and Pell came up the skiff's spine fast when the registry token at its throat registered what the core was doing. The formal carriage gone, all 4 ambulatory limbs moving.
Salvage Chief Lestab, you are deep-seating the component. That is you cannot that destroys,
Yeah.
It was Daco who stopped Pell from reaching him. Not with a hand, not with the inherited tool at the hip, but by simply standing in the spine between the Suul and the core, an old kin-marked Vask filling a narrow space. The 2 crew Suul did the arithmetic on a confined hull and an immovable Vask faster than Pell did, and held back. Then the 4th anchor seated, and the core gave its deep, final lurch, and the pale blue pulse settled into the keel like it had always been part of it, and there was nothing in the skiff anymore worth a Suul house's freight. The spine went quiet. Everyone in it understood what had happened at the same time, which was the only mercy in it. Pell of Two Voices stood very still in the skiff's spine and recalculated. Hari watched it happen, watched a young broker run the new arithmetic and arrive, with Suul precision, at 0. The lien was still perfected. The right was still real, and the object of the right attached to was now worth less than the cost of the crew standing in the room, because the only way to take it was to crack it, and a cracked core was freight nobody would pay.
You have destroyed a fortune.
I didn't deny your house anything.
It was the worst kind of trap for a Suul, because it was not a trap at all. Hari had broken no law, breached no contract, obstructed no lawful seizure. He had performed a maintenance operation, badly, on a hull whose owner stood beside him, consenting. The lien remained Pell's to execute. It was simply now not worth executing. A Suul who spent a house's resources collecting a debt that returned less than it cost would have to carry judgment in clade memory forever. A young broker's first famous mistake, repeated to apprentices for generations as the time of two voices hauled scrap across 40 light minutes out of spite. Pell did not make that mistake. Suul did not, as a rule, get to be old by making it. After a long, articulate silence, the two manipulator arms refolded into formal carriage.
The lien is released for cause of valuelessness.
Then the factor and the crew and the empty hauling sled withdrew through the lock, and the skiff's spine held only a human, a Vask, and a drive core that would never again be worth taking, and would, Hari supposed, run that battered Vask hull until the hull was dust, exactly as its makers had built it to. Hari sat in the spine a while after they'd gone, the multi-tool, Corv, loose in his hand, and did the sums he had been not doing for the last hour. The debt to Erie was exactly as large as it had been this morning. The clock was exactly as loud. He had held a different life in his two hands, the one without the sums, and he had deep-seated it into a vast keel with a dead woman's tool. And he would go back to the cold lockup and the rent and the contract due in 3 days, same as ever. He found he could live with it. That was the thing about the sums. They only ever measured the one kind of cost.
You could have let them take it.
Yeah, well,
That is not why.
no.
Daco stayed 2 days, which was a long time for a Vask to stay anywhere with a roof, and they did not talk about 47, and they did not need to. Daco sat in the contractor lounge drinking the terrible synthetic broth and frightening the bay crew, who had never seen a Vask up close and could not stop sneaking looks at the kin marks. Harry ran his contract, delivered the power bus inert and certified to Irie's agent, made the payment, watched the debt clock tick down by its usual unsatisfying sliver. On the second day at the lock, Daco told him the rest of it. The thing Hari had not asked because he'd assumed there was nothing to ask.
Twice now.
Harry did not have anything to say to that, so he said the thing he did have.
Tell the fleet's Corv still cuts.
The close-set amber eyes did the thing again, the one Hari still had no word for, and then Daco was through the lock and gone, and the skiff undocked on its own restored power and slid out into the dark it had come from. A Vask home with a heart nobody would ever take, flying on a core deep-seated forever by a man who had made a fortune worthless and gone back to doing sums. He stood at the viewport a while after the skiff was gone, the multi-tool warm under his thumb, and thought about the 2 days and the dead woman's name he could say out loud now, and the debt downstairs that was exactly as large as ever. Then a Bay Crew kid leaned in to say the orbital admin wanted to know why a Vask hull had been logged, departed, and somehow generated a discharged Suul lien and an Accord registry note in between, all on Hari Rao's Bay, with no contract filed for any of it. Hari looked at the kid and thought about the forms that question was going to turn into, and the audit that liked forms, and the 15-year gap on his record that an auditor had never quite stopped finding interesting.
Tell him it was maintenance.